The fourth item has to do with the crime lab. I was asked to do some research on the crime lab, the .4 mil levy that was passed in 2018. It's a continuous levy through public records requests that I received from the prosecutor's office and through the budget director. I did see that right now the numbers are every year the crime lab is pulling in $4.2 million of revenues, and their bottom line is increasing by $1.6 million. That's a 38% to their bottom line. Now, I know in government they don't call it profit, but in the private sector, we call it that's profit. Their cash reserves have increased to, as of May 31st, to I believe it's $6.6 million. And my concern is, since this is a continuous levy, which means forever, many taxpayers and voters do not understand what a continuous levy means. So I've asked the Budget Commission I sent an email to Auditor Galloway, since I understand he's in charge of the Budget Commission, to look into the numbers, because I would like to see that, unless somebody can persuade me otherwise, that $1 million of the .4 mil that was passed by the voters, that is put in abeyance or rescinded completely and given back to the taxpayers. I have not heard from Auditor Galloway yet, but I'm sure I will. I just, again, wanted to make the commissioners aware of the items that we are working on for the citizens of Lake County.
Thank you, sir.
Any question?
Yes. Actually, I believe
If you
gentlemen
have questions, I'll wait, but I'd like to weigh in on the crime lab comment.
I would consider you to be the subject matter expert, so.
I don't know about the expert, but the bottom line is, Mr. Massie, the Budget Commission has no ability by law to reduce the crime lab levy. I'm not disputing the numbers that you state. You are correct when you say it is a continuing levy. The Budget Commission can only look at a budget of whatever political subdivision, and if it's properly authorized, they're mandated to go forward with that budget. That's a requirement. And the reason this budget, or this levy rather, is properly authorized is because it was by a vote of the people. So that's the distinction and the important factor here. Prior to the last crime lab levy, I know there was a crime lab levy in the late 90s, and the hope back then was that levy would last 15 years. It in fact lasted 20 years. It is the hope that this levy, the monies, will last a significant period of time. Obviously there's instrumentation that needs to be purchased, capital improvements, things like that, but I guess I want to make it most clear that the Budget Commission has no authority to reduce this voter-approved levy.
Is there, thank you, Mr. Hackman, is there anyone in the county government that is looking out for the individual taxpayers? Or can the crime lab continue to make $1.6 million a year? And what happens if the cash balance of the crime lab, let's say it reaches 20 million, or let's say it reaches the same level of the of Deepwood Center, $65 million. Is that okay?
I'm not going to deal with speculation here, Mr. Massie. With regard to the developmental disabilities, there is a rather more recent law that I know you're familiar with, where there is the potential for the Budget Commission to weigh in on that, but again, the last levy from the late 90s lasted 20 years, and it came to the point where it was really important and crucial to put another levy on, and that is what was done, and the voters approved it.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mr. Hackman, and then all I can really do then is I will continue to voice my complaint about the crime lab, and in this day and age with an economy, when you've got double-digit inflation, when you've got seniors that are going to be priced out of their home, we have a prosecutor's office that is continuing to earn $1.6 million. Thank you very much.
But actually, I think, if I could just add, though, it is a common belief that the Budget Commission does have authority to adjust collections and hold things in abeyance. That is, our prosecutor pointed out, is not the case. That's a very common misconception, and for whatever reason, that's not something that ever gets corrected. So I thank you, Mr. Hackman, for correcting that, because that is something that in the general public, people just seem to think that is one of the checks and balances, and it is not. Commissioner Plechnik, I believe you had something you wanted to add, sir.
Mr. President, one thing we need to bear in mind with respect to the crime lab, the county, or any department is that there's not just the annualized cost of salaries and benefits. That is the major liability, but from time to time, there are big capital expenses. Technology is always changing. We're hearing from our narcotics board that the types of drugs that are coming through Ohio are different every other month. And the kind of machines and technology that are needed to analyze these substances safely is always changing too. So we so often as taxpayers, and understandably, push back when we hear from an agency that we need $20 million for this or this or this major need, and we don't necessarily dispute the fact that a new building or a new piece of technology is necessary, but we raise our hand and say, why didn't anyone put some money to the side to prepare for that liability? I think that Lake County is unique in that we actually do put money to the side to prepare for major capital projects and liabilities, as opposed to going back to the taxpayers over and over again asking for more. You could criticize past boards of commissioners for saving a little more than $30 million in our rainy day and capital projects funds, but I would praise those commissioners because they recognized that a new safety facility and jail were going to be needed. And because of that foresight, we're in a position to build that jail without putting a sales or property tax levy on the ballot like so many other counties are doing. If the crime lab were to spend every single penny that came in every single year, the next machine, the next analyzer, the next upgrade to safety facilities would result in another levy. And I think that we would rightly raise our hands and say, why do you keep coming back for more? I do think it's fair to note that these are not cheap machines. These are not cheap facilities to maintain. And so much of this is set by state and federal law that you can't precisely plan for what the federal government is going to require this lab to have next. So I do think it's a fair point that our prosecutor's office is not just trying to have enough money in the budget to pay the salaries each year, but is anticipating the continual need to upgrade those facilities. If you were to take a tour of the crime lab today versus 10 years ago, it looks completely different because the substances that they're analyzing are thousands of times more dangerous. If just a whiff of powder goes in the air, every single person in that building would be dead. And so they had to put up special barriers, airproof facilities and rooms. These are not cheap, and we can't entirely anticipate what the next innovation will be. So I share your concern of being as efficient as possible. I tend not to like continuous levies. I like to be able to vote and have accountability every 3 to 5 years. But I will say, I think we'd all be even more outraged if next year the crime lab announced, due to federal regulations, they have a $5 million expense, but nobody saved any money for it. So whoops, we need more taxes. I think we should give credit where credit is due to our county prosecutor for making sure that there's a fund available for those expenses.
The biggest change I saw, since I just had a crime lab tour 2 weeks ago, was how much more work they pushed through the drugs and toxicology portion of the crime lab, which was amazing to see. I mean, between 2008 and 2014, that was the biggest change that I saw. But going back to the point about the levy, maybe a good question for our legal counsel. I suspect they analyzed it and came to the conclusion that this levy will last 10 to 20 years, probably 15 years.
Hope it's at least 15.
Yeah, and with a declining balance, you know, the expectation is we'll get there without going back to the taxpayers. And Mr. Massie, I can certainly appreciate your viewpoint. You know, we should all be concerned about the taxpayers for any new levy or current levy, any continuing levy. And I believe that the due diligence was done, but I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
May I add some more comments, Commissioner
Oh,
Hamilton?
please, sir, thank you. The floor is yours, and we were the ones continuing the conversation, so thank you, sir.
Commissioner Plechik, are you aware that the state received ARPA funding, and that money was given to, I can't remember the department, the legal division down at the state, and they told the Lake County Crime Lab that there's $250,000 available to them, and that money has been applied for, and it is to replace a leaky tank that they use to, I guess, fire bullets in to determine the caliber or whatever it is. So there is additional money coming in, even though you've got $6.8 million in the crime lab. You've got the state, chipping in with $250,000. Also, I recall that when the levy was being passed, I was told that the people were told that the crime lab is going to be able to provide more services into the community by actually going out and collecting evidence. They'll be the prime collectors of the evidence because they're the experts. What I am told now is that they will go out, but only if they are requested by the local police departments. And that was a major departure from what the citizens were told when the levy was being pushed in 2018. And also there was an article that Prosecutor Colson was quoted as saying, well, this levy will allow the crime lab to grow. And anytime that I hear a public official saying that the government body is going to grow, I'm reminded of Ron Young's farewell speech when he said that the two top priorities of government is to grow and to protect itself. I'll end my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to address the